As we ride the election tide, I wanted to share a piece that pretty much took this article from the Washington Post in 2017 that displayed how gerrymandering works. So as we see here, this is a perfect sample size of 50 people. And we see the red districts and the blue districts kind of outlined. We see 60% blue and 40% red, so we would know that the majority is blue. But in all these three different scenarios, the data is cut up in different ways. So in the perfect representation of the first graph, we see how in a perfect world, if all the same people were living in the same places and nothing was nuanced or complex, that we would have 5 very clean districts that would be pure in red and blue vertical lines. In number 2, we have compact but unfair, where we divide it up horizontally, where actually in this instance there are 0 red districts because they are all in the minority, and that all 5 districts end up being blue. But in the third chart, which is the gerrymandered chart, neither compact nor fair, you start to see how the 2 districts on the most right that have the most blue have been shimmied over to only have 1 red square, and then the rest of the data has been, then the other 3 districts have the most red in them. So in this scenario, by the way that it has been cut up and rejiggered, the red wins. And so as a musician, I look at this and I started to see patterns, just like we were talking about in data visualization. How are patterns being formed over time? And since music is a time-based medium, how can we potentially hear the cacophony of how these districts are split up if I were to represent them in music and how sound goes by? So many of digital audio workstations are also graphically represented as squares or little qubits of time, little small bits of time that are quantized that go by. And so it wasn't a far stretch of the imagination for me to look at these charts and think of them as rhythm or start to think of them as music. And so I started to just kind of sit with these charts, and I entitled 3 movements that kind of set up, number 1, the control of the sound that you're hearing, or just to get your ear used to what it means. So the first movement is called indivisible, and it's exactly just the 5 districts as they are in their pure forms going down the line, all reds and all blues. The second movement is called Land of the Free, fall, and the third movement is called Off the Rails, of where you will actually be able to hear the most gerrymandered state, in the sense that its entire point is to confuse and to stretch structures that are there and to create a sense of cacophony. And its other title is called Deep Fried Mystery, because I think that's kind of what we're in. The piece is called DEUS Ex Machina, and it's a process piece. And for those of you who are not familiar with process music is a term that was coined by minimalist percussion composer Steve Reich. Process music is not the process of composition, but rather pieces of music that are literally themselves processes. So it's essentially a system of rules and specific limitations, arranging notes and pitches and time that involve kind of a long-term change over time that you may or may not be able to detect by your ear, that a small transformation starts to occur through these musical events that are related to the complex, to the process itself. So either the process can be heard and be very obvious, or it can be kind of hidden within the structure, and it's just the mechanism behind how this entire piece unfolds. So process music is not necessarily, is in some ways I consider it kind of an exercise, because you're literally setting up a system of rules and limitations and durations, and you just kind of let it go. And so what you get at the end is what you get. Deus Ex Machina, the title, is quite literally translated in Latin as God from the Machine. And in literature, Deus Ex Machina is actually a plot device where a seemingly unsolvable problem in a story is suddenly and abruptly resolved by an unexpected and unlikely occurrence. Its function can be to resolve an otherwise irresolvable plot situation, to surprise the audience, or to bring the tale to a happy ending, or to act as a comedic device. Which all of which I think is kind of timely in the air. What's in the air right now as we ride the election season. And so I created this piece thinking about what are a system of rules and limitations here that I can set up to make this a successful piece of music, or a piece of music in the sense that you are able to hear this state of chaos start to happen upon this grid that is actually quite orderly. And following the strong and longstanding tradition, Princeton music today here is quite innovative and adventurous, but tipping the hat to the serialist history here with Milton Babbitt, and the minimalist presence here with a lot of our composers and faculty. This is a very minimalist approach to a piece of music that is very heady. And so this data sonification, essentially, I feel like data sonification is only successful when it is meaningfully assigned values to music. So you can assign a lot of different things to mean certain visualizations or sound, but until they are actually audible or actually perceived as processes and creates a sense of larger meaning or structure over time, that's what I aim for in this type of correlation of when you're setting up the design structure of how to make a process piece. So I was driven by this idea of going with meaning first. And so I looked at the blue districts and the red districts. And as you see at the bottom here, this is actually a first draft of the score. And the bottom, I've lined up the alphabet, and underneath it, the 12 semitones of the musical scale. And it repeats after it is through. And I started to create sentences behind certain ideologies or certain virtues that each party may hold. So along the red, you will see going down and up, make America hate again. And going down through blue, love trumps hate, respect equality. I was trying to figure out how can someone audibly hear conflict, or two things trying to get along with each other. So in the orange, you start to see the gerrymandering trace of the chart. But what happened with this is that no matter how many different sonorities I matched with this system that I had set up, random only gets you more random when you gerrymander it. So to me, that was not audibly actually music. You couldn't hear the process because it was already semi-serial to begin with, that you wouldn't be able to know what happened to it. So I started to go back to basics. I thought about, okay, so what if the red was a duple, as you see at the top, and the blue were a triple? So duples, and if you put that together, you can already hear the disjunctness, but also how they can be seen as consonant. And so it was about how to make this legible with these aesthetic design choices, and how does it actually extrapolate some type of meaning as a sense of music that goes by. So I started thinking about the pitches. What do I want the red districts to be and the blue districts to be? And I looked at the piano keyboard and started to go very simple, because a lot of processed music is actually most successful when you approach it with a very constrained system, actually. It's that paradox in creativity where actually if you have all the choices in the world, you're actually pretty paralyzed because you have so many options. Or if you are limiting yourself to a certain amount of data set or pitch family, then actually your constraints become the jumping board off of which their interactions become the music. And so I looked at the white keys and the black keys, and I determined that the red districts would be the white keys, which would be the red district would live in the white key family, and the blue district would live in the black key family. So would be blue, would be the red district. So you can actually hear the tonal shift of how they are either interacting with each other. And also what's interesting to note is that usually it's the intermingling of the black keys and the white keys, which allow for modulation, which allow for greater expression of music. But since we're just trying to stay very constrained here, I've kind of just narrowed it down to that kind of aural sensation of knowing what's diatonic in the white keys and what is in the blue keys. Interesting sidebar, this is also how you get to the land of make-believe and Mr. Rogers. So rhythmic assignment. So we have pitches figured out in terms of how to have them starkly against each other so that you can hear the red family, the red districts versus the blue districts. And then rhythmically, I was thinking, okay, so the pitched instruments, we can have the values of the red be a little longer than the blue, which looks, so that would be a dotted quarter versus a quarter. Unpitched instruments, which we have a tap artist and a spoons player. So the unpitched instrument, which are short and information that is just kind of quantizing time. So the red is a duple and the blue as a triple. So you see this kind of laid out here. And so when you have the gerrymandered chart, what ends up happening when you apply all these values to the pitches and to the durations, you start to see that it has a cascading line. And these cascading troughs and crests happen at different moments. And that's because each note value is assigned to, so this is, percussion 1 is district 1 here. Bum, 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 ba, do, 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 do. And because they are all offset from one another and live in different pitch families, what ends up happening in the music is that we get this phasing effect where the different crests and the troughs and the different tonal families start to meet and disjoint at different areas. They are also uneven. And so these different start points and end points start to create a pattern where they over time start to spread apart and start to offset from one another, which is precisely the point, because I want to be able to hear the sense of gerrymandering and the sense of structure being torn down. So the navigation of these charts, I'm not sure if we're able to see that animation that was happening earlier, but the graphics you can see here on one of the in the sidebar here. The navigation of the first chart goes up and down following the district lines, just as a water might flow. And the second goes in a circle, starts at the red and loops around. And every time you hear a stomp is when the district line is. So you can actually audibly hear when this becomes, when we've actually jumped to the other district. Now with the gerrymandered district, as you can see over in the animation, it starts to get offset from one another and they're kind of snaking around in different forms and restarting at different places. And one of the things that I really started to think about with the percussionists and was the pitched instruments and also the unpitched instruments. So the pitches were really about the red versus the blue. What colors, the colors as in the saturation of them, are they swayable? If they are actually played in certain combination, could they be considered as a different interval that might fit into a different family? Whereas the rhythmic structure of the spoons and the taps, because they have no tonal information whatsoever, they kind of just represent the objectivity of time and the grid structure down. So here I've written the spoons pattern, which literally follows, because the rhythm structure is trying to be unswayed entirely by the districts, it's going to keep doing the thing it did in graph 1 and go all the way down 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1. So that just comes out rhythmically. So you get a sense of what I'm talking about. There's no necessary phrasing logic to this, but its irregularity starts to tell you where the districts have been cut, and the taps also depict this as well in their triple and duple meter. So this is the resulting score that happened, which is essentially a graphic score, which is just the charts themselves. So the performers have been looking at the gerrymandered charts, knowing the rules, and is essentially a sense of it's different senses of direction. And this is the actual notation itself, which is the open score of different cell structures. So here is chart number 1. This is chart number 2. Chart number 2 right here. And chart number 3 here with the tonal information and the unpitched information over here. So, for folks who read music or don't read music, either way, it's essentially these squares going by. And so, what we're going to hear now is a live performance of the Edward T. Cohn Ensemble in Residence here at Princeton University, so percussion. They're a wonderful, adventurous percussion quartet. And tap artist Andrew Nemmer and we all performed this piece at a Princeton Sound Kitchen in 2017 in the March following the 2016 election upset. And so we'll be playing for you now the live performance of the sound of Deus Ex Machina. So the first piece actually has set up your expectations of the harmony and rhythm, and it gets more complex as we go. Thank you, Daniel Pillis, for those wonderful animations also. They were simply graphs until actually our preparation for the symposium to animate the work in real time. So thank you, Daniel.
The sound of the clapping without sound, what is that? The world's, the sound of no hands clapping is kind of one hand clapping. That's what I'm hearing, because you can't
Zoom
clap.
applause. Zoom applause.
I'm applauding for you.
I can see the emojis now.
So we're open for questions. If anyone wants to send any questions in, I could start with one. I don't see if I have one yet. Do we have any popped up? I can start by asking, what actually do you know? Does gerrymandering, the word Jerry in that, come from? Is it a fellow named Jerry?
Oh, I do not know.
We don't know.
I actually really, yeah, the etymology of the word is definitely, I'm sure actually someone from panel 2.
It was from Elbridge Gerry in Massachusetts, I think.
Please, yeah.
Excellent. Whoever this is, you are welcome to join if you have thoughts on gerrymandering to add.
Please.
No thoughts, but the term, this is Simon Levin, but it was Eldridge, I forget the spelling of the first name, Jerry, for whom the concept's named after.
Very interesting. So it actually was a fellow named Jerry.
Last name.
Last name was with a G.
Right.
Fascinating. So, well, I'm not seeing any questions pop up. So, from your perspective, here's a question.
He was, by the way, actually, I think, Vice President of the fifth Vice President of the United States under James Madison.
This Jerry fellow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we have some questions that came in. One in particular from a local artist. I'm curious about the choice to use a tap dancer instead of another non-pitched percussionist. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm part of the TED Fellows, and I met Andrew Nemmer through that community, and he's always been someone I've wanted to collab, and we have the gift to work with So Percussion here. And I'd always kind of thought about I think very gesturally also. I do think about music in its form, but I always see a stage, or I always see a graphic. I always see either a gesture or a movement, or there's always some visual or kinetic element so that it's not just sound. And so the choice to use a tap dancer was just because I knew a phenomenal artist, and this seemed like a really synergistic collaboration to bring the instruments of and kind of the tradition of minimalist percussion music, and also to depict, by the way, this is also not where I live. All the music that you've been hearing today in interstitials have been different things from my repertoire, which is much more heart and gut. And I have to say, this might be my most head piece that there is. But because it's a process piece, that's precisely what it's about. It's about kind of coming up with a certain, the players, the language set that you're using, and how to start correlating the aesthetics of sound to meaning. And so unpitched, to me, because there's no tonal information, there's no elongation possible, there's no vibration or beating that's going to happen, to me that just seemed like a logical thing to create a grid of time that was objective and going by just counting like a clock, and that the colors may be going at each other in different ways, trying to make sense of each other, but that the grid of time is the thing that's kind of going. They're just going in two different directions, and that was kind of precisely the disjunct I was looking for. So pitched and unpitched just became the binary I was working with there.
For me, it's hard not to see the grid of Zoom in there, of course, in the moment. The grid, though, has such a rich history in art making, and especially in music. So it's really interesting to see how you really saw a piece of modern art in a news article, where that grid and the colors of it and the structure really resonated with you. We have a question and a comment from Catherine Ryamaki. This was great. Have you thought about a fourth movement based on real world districts, including how they have changed through time?
No, I haven't thought of that yet, but that's an amazing idea. I feel like, especially after next week, we will have so much more data to work with, and to analyze, and to that is very rich for sonification, and just to see what I always feel like with music, because it's a time-based medium and it's a phenomenological thing that you walk through, your whole body goes through it. It's a felt thing. Um, that It's always about how things pull through the needle of time. And there's the feeling of, as you go through it, as you make the music and as you experience the music, and then there's the objectivity that you get at the end once you're done with it and you are able to look at it and see, was there anything that came out of that would tip off, like where things started to fall apart, or where things started to aberrate, or the system started to break down. So yeah, that's a really great suggestion. Thank you, Catherine. I think this piece will most likely have a sequel, considering our current landscape.
Bora, we have one last question by Carlton Bright. What was your notation based on, or derived from, or was it original?
Carlton, I'm so glad
Notation.
to see you here. The notation was literally based on the gerrymandering charts. So I looked at them just as a graphic score. Um, I mean, as a composer, there's also dots on a page, and that interpretation does exist for the players. But I really did, it was completely inspired by the Washington Post gerrymandering charts of how they look like either MIDI piano roll little segments that you can draw out in MIDI and then be able to get different shapes or different phrases. And I saw a grid of squares and colors go by, and how many different types of time-based systems or notation software and things like that have a use squares or rectangles as a unit of time to be able to quantize and create music. Because I always think that there's two schools of thought in music. Or the way it kind of breaks out is the notation-based people and then the time-based creators. And so, there's different pedagogy surrounding each one. But I really wanted to honor the graphic score first and see how we would be able to read that left to right, up to down. So many different cultures read, Asian cultures read right to left and down, up and up to down in ancient texts, and other in Western notation we go left to right. And so I was just looking at all the different ways we can navigate the score, different ways you would be able to find different phrases and different forms by what rules you set at the top. So yeah, the notation was purely based on the graphics from the article.
Thank you, Bora. And I look forward. Are you going to do a short presentation for us now?
Yeah, so I know that we have a really beautiful, an amazing day ahead, and stay tuned. Dr. Carl Hart is coming up. But I did, as we are in this election cycle, as Jen Schwartz had also mentioned in the last panel, there's a lot of grief in the air, and there's a lot of uncertainty and everything in the air. And so actually, I do want to end with a piece called Gift as a musical offering, to ground us in this time. And also that even though we're in a strange situation where we can't be in the room together, that at least we are able to resonate in sound together, and imagine the world we'd like to see.